Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa, ko tai mai ki te awhi tēnei kaupapa, ka pakanga tonu mātou o mātou rangatiratanga. Tēnā koutou. I want to say thank you to the organisers, Selwyn, Kātini and Massey University for the tremendous work they've done in organising this conference, and also to the Human Rights Commission. I've just got a few minutes, so I was going to come up here and shamelessly try and sell my book, but I'm above that. So, so what I thought I would do is, well, in the Puka Puka incidentally, which is focused on this kaupapa, is just talk about some of the key themes in the book that I think are important and significant and that have come up during the course of our discussion today. And one of them I think is critical, is the idea of always looking backward when you're looking forward to the future. And I think something that's critical here is the remarkable way in which this institution, in which this declaration was crafted. Because sometimes it may feel like it's just kind of a bolt out of the blue and it just suddenly appeared. But, you know, if you listen to Moana and Peter this morning, that's just not true, right? This is an instrument that's been crafted over 2 decades by our leaders who went and travelled at tremendous cost to 12,000 miles to Geneva every year to state our case. And when they went to Geneva, what did they talk about? Well, naturally, they talked about tino rangatiratanga, right? And they talked about self-determination. And they talked about Māori as First Peoples, our mana, and they talked about how that had been taken away from us, despite the fact that it had been guaranteed in the Treaty of Waitangi and He Whakaputanga. And I think that that's critical in looking at the declaration, because without that type of argument, eloquently expressed by Aroha, Maui, Pauline, Moana, and many other of our leaders, then I just don't think we would have had the right to self-determination included in the declaration. We wouldn't have the right to free, prior, informed consent, and we wouldn't have the right to historical redress. You know, these are remarkable provisions included in a human rights instrument that you don't see in any other instrument. And I think it's because of the particular type of history and argument that our people, our advocates, brought to the declaration negotiations, not only from Aotearoa either, but from our Canadian relations as well, and from the States and from Australia. Together, that provided a compelling reason to include those rights in the declaration. So in looking forward, I think it's important to look back about why are these rights in the declaration? It's because of what we said, what we sought. And not only did that result in these breakthrough rights contained in the declaration, it actually reconfigured the way that declarations and human rights are negotiated in the UN. Because prior to Māori and other Indigenous peoples coming to the declaration and talking about their rights to self-determination, it was a process that was run by states, unilaterally, and that's largely the case today for most of these negotiations in international fora. The people who are affected by these instruments are usually relegated to the back rooms, into the back of the room, into the margins. But Māori and other advocates came and said, look, this is about self-determination. We are a nation. We have been denied our rights to decolonise. If you marginalise us, that will mean that the whole process is a total sham. And so what resulted, and it wasn't easy, I mean, Rawiri talked about the various walkouts that were staged, that were led, in one case by, in others by Māori. What resulted is a negotiation between states, Indigenous states and Pākehā states. And that is a tremendous contribution to the way in which human rights instruments are framed, but also accounts for the type of rights that we have in the Declaration. So, yeah, I'm an advocate for looking back while looking forward. A few other points I wanted to make just briefly was that, well, okay, so we have this declaration endorsed in 2007. Now what do we do with it? Well, the point of going to the declaration was to set these supranational standards, right? Which is just a flash way of saying that we want international law to reflect our aspirations and our desires and rights. And now we have that after a long battle, right, over 2 decades. And now the question is, what do we do with it? Well, the important factor is that it stands above New Zealand as a domestic state. What we find today that often that the New Zealand government will point to the treaty or point to cultural rights and say that is what Māori have. And that's all well and good, you know. The treaty, he whakaputunga, rights through tradition, it's a part of who we are. What's challenging, though, for Māori advocates is that the Crown will translate, and this is the point that Cheryl's made, will take those treaty rights and determine what they mean, unilaterally, without our input. It's the executive or cabinet that is essentially determining what treaty principles are and determining whether our current policies relating to treaty settlements or natural resources or co-management meet that standard. Now, the great thing about international human rights is that we are able to step outside of this process, which is dominated by the state, and go to the collection of states and seek an independent, authoritative opinion on whether New Zealand is complying with its human rights standards. And that is unique to us, and that is a critical way in which we can battle for our rights. And let's just face it, we are a liberal democracy, and so there are many good things that are at our fingertips. If we want to effect change, including freedom of expression, we can do things that many other nations cannot do. But at the end of the day, there are limitations. Treaty settlements, for example, we look at these co-management agreements, we look at the deals that have been made, and each government is sidestepping this issue of Māori ownership of natural resources, of why at the moment is the big issue. It used to be foreshore and seabed. So there's a whole list of things that we're yet to do. Constitutional reform, how do we give effect to the treaty in the Constitution, entrenching the Māori seats, extractive industry, trans-Tasman resources, marine consent to extract iron ore off the coast of Taranaki. You know, it just goes on and on and on. And we can continue to use domestic processes to advance our rights, but also we must, and it's essential for us, to access these international rights and to keep using these processes to put pressure on the Crown. So, just to recap, in our puka puka, on the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we talk about the history of human rights. We also talk about the implications that the Declaration has for domestic policy in relation to treaty settlements, extractive industry, business and human rights. But a key component that's included in the book is a section by Claire Charters, Fleur Tiaho, and Tracy Whare, which is talking about how we can use these international mechanisms in the Declaration to advance rights in international fora. And we've seen that already in recent weeks with Pānia for Seoul, making the adequate expression of Indigenous rights for Ihu Mahatau and the Third Committee and the impact that that's had domestically. You know, it's had great uptake by the media, for example. So there's lots of potential out there, basically. But I just want to say kia ora to everyone for coming along here to tautoko this important project, and looking forward to working with you all. Okay, ngā mihi niu, kia koutou katoa. Kia ora.